Well, hello. Thanks for the intro and welcome again to another edition, to this week's edition of Tim Scott Uncancelled with me, Tim Scott. Great to have you with us, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, and however you're watching. Great to have you with us for another show. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, so the format is that I say a few words first. And we've got some interesting issues to go through this week, as I trust we have every week. And we go through the papers. We look behind the front page. We don't just look at the front page like they do on maybe Sky News. And if it's a big story, it's pretty much the same story on all the front pages. So we go behind the front page, buy the newspapers so you don't have to. And we come up with some really interesting stories. And we always try and get a slightly quirky or humorous one in at the end there. And my guest today is going to be former member of the European Parliament and libertarian Bill Etheridge, and we'll be hearing more about him, and I'll introduce him in a minute. So the stories today we've got specifically from the papers. We've got the possible question mark return of Prince Harry. Will they have him back? The end of Starmer. What's the mood at Westminster like? Are Starmer's days numbered? We have a story on the high street, high taxes and the end of the high street. And what's your high street looking like? Is it loads of boarded up shops and that kind of thing? We've got a slightly more serious article on hospices and the relevance of that to the assisted dying bill, or as I prefer to call it, assisted suicide. And finally, we have a rather amusing cartoon involving Lord Mandelson and Prince Andrew. You won't want to miss that. So what a week we've had. I've been to the Reform Conference, which was quite interesting. I had a really good time at the Reform Conference. Loads of people there. They had over 10,000 people there. Very, very interesting time. Lots to see and do. And yeah, here's a picture of the conference. It was reminded me of the Conservative conference back in the day when, they actually had a conference rather than a corporate lobbying event. And members were actually putting forward and debating and voting on motions. There was loads of energy. I managed to arrive in a rather amusing taxi. And it was great. There was a real buzz. Here's the taxi I arrived by. No, only kidding. That was at the entrance as we came in. Looks rather good. I don't know whether that's the Nigel Mobile, but maybe we'll find out. And I did meet some interesting people there, including their chairman, Dr. David Bull. Here he is. Here we are at one of the sessions. So there was a lot going on. Also this week, I managed to meet Robert Jenrick again, the Conservative contestant for the leader, and beaten by Kemi Badenoch, of course. Here they are, both trying to look terribly happy with the result. And I was sat next to him at a dinner, which was quite interesting. Actually, he's growing on me, and he's getting some good social media output going. And also watching PMQs as I do every week in my nerdy way. She actually, for a change, had a very good PMQs as she pressed Peter Mandelson on Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer was forced to say that he had confidence, or was it full confidence, in Peter Mandelson. Well, if Peter Mandelson was someone that Keir Starmer had full confidence in, how can we have any confidence in Keir Starmer? So goodness knows why we sent this man. He was going to be nothing but trouble. Honestly, an accident waiting to happen. And we sent him to Washington, and then it all blew up, didn't it? As inevitably it would. I would have put a significant amount of money on that. And here he is trying to explain himself.
A result of his behaviour and his illegal criminal activities. And secondly, I regret very, very deeply indeed carrying on that association with him for far longer than I should have done. And I regret very much that I fell for his lies. I fell and accepted assurances that he had given me about his indictment, his original criminal case in Florida, like very many people, I took it face value what we see. With hindsight, with fresh information, many years later, we realize that we have been wrong to believe him as a charismatic criminal liar in the US. And very much indeed, I felt it like an albatross around my neck since his death in 2018 or 19.
Okay, so you get the picture. There's Lord Mandelson attempting to explain himself. Okay, well, I think it's time for our guest today, and then we'll go straight into the Charlie Kirk story, of course, that's been pretty prominent this week for all the right reasons. And then we've got 5 stories from you for the press. So let's meet this week's guest. Bill Etheridge. Bill, former MEP and now Libertarian. Welcome to Tim Scott Uncancelled. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
Good stuff. And so why don't we let's start with Charlie Kirk. I mean, I know you've got a few things to say on this, and I think let's go straight into that. I mean, it really does seem like a blatantly targeted political assassination bill. So I'm happy to sort of hand the floor over to you for a little bit, because I know there's a few things you want to say about this.
I see this as a pivotal moment in modern political history in the West. It's that serious. It's that big an issue. Charlie Kirk, I had followed and watched him over a period of time. Didn't agree with everything he said. Of course, we're entitled not to agree with everything someone says. And that's part of what he stood for. But what I loved was the way that he took the debate to, if you like, hostile territory, to university and college campuses, had an open discussion with people, spoke to them on their own terms, always held his ground, but was polite, well-mannered, charming while he did it. And this was a man who managed to make conservative values, traditional conservative values, come across as young and quite trendy. Christian beliefs, family man, rule of law, low taxation, less regulation, all of the good stuff, all of the stuff that anyone who would call themselves a conservative would really believe in. He was getting that message across to young people in a way that no one has been able to do for many, many years. And then to see, and I regret it that I saw the video actually of the shooting itself, that awful image. And by the way, whilst it's deeply upsetting, I don't agree with calls to censor it, because I want people to see the real horror of what happened on that day, and to see this bright, intelligent life force of a man who had so much ahead of him, who potentially was a future president, let's be honest, snuffed out in such a fashion has sickened me, horrified me, hurt me, upset me. And I think it should do to anyone. And I would say that if he was of the left, because there's something about him that was a life force, something about him that made us all better off for him being there. And I feel it's a massive moment, a turning point in political history. And when we find out exactly who did it and why, I think the lid's going to blow off a lot of things. I think this is a time we will always look back on and say, well, where were you when you found out about this?
Yeah, it's one of those sort of moments, isn't it, Bill? I mean, he was a remarkable figure. Yes, he had some strong opinions, but you know, good for him, and opinions he was perfectly entitled to hold and that he articulated very well. What I liked about him was his meetings. He would have 2 microphones, you know, one for him and one for the audience, and people were positively encouraged to come forward and not just to ask him questions, but actually come forward and have a bit of a go at him. That was part of the program. He spoke recently at the Oxford Union, only about a month or so back. And he made some very good points. I'm sure he won some people over, but there was at least one guy who stood up at Charlie's invitation. He wasn't a heckler, and had a right go at him. And I think, you know, look at his following. He had over 5 million social media followers. there was reckoned to be, on the day when at that Utah University, about 3,000 people there. He had a way of drawing crowds, and he was committed to dialogue, and perhaps not despite his strong opinions, but perhaps because of his opinions, Bill, he was really committed to dialogue. And I know he was worried about America's future and what would happen if people stopped listening to each other.
Yeah, and he's been horribly proved right. He almost prophesied. I've seen several times him talking about the fact that he thought something would happen to him, but he still kept going. And it's that kind of bravery that marks someone out. And we can cast our minds back in history. And I always vividly think about when Martin Luther King was assassinated. He knew that his life was in danger, and he kept on going because he believed in what he was doing. And that's what makes him such a wonderful figure in political history. Now, I believe that what's happened here is of equivalent importance to the political scene. This man has been martyred for free speech. It sounds like over-the-top language, but actually it's true. This is a martyr to the cause of freedom of speech, and his name must always be remembered, and we must always honour the values that he was putting forward of dialogue, of open discussion, and of making politics fun and interesting and exciting, not stuffy, but being there and saying, come on then, let's have a discussion, let's have it out. We need more of that. And I hope rather than frightening people, it encourages more people to follow his footsteps and say, we won't be silenced.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Good comments. And I think, people turned up to see him because there was an educational value in what he did. But also his rallies looked, quite fun. A bit of a carnival atmosphere, and I think people turned up to see that. You're right. This is a seismic event, and I would agree with you, Bill. If Bernie Sanders was assassinated or AOC was assassinated, I would say the same. This is huge. This really is huge. Well, Bill Etheridge, thank you for your comments there. Well, let's move on to our newspaper stories. And as I said at the beginning, we have a good look through, and we try to find really interesting, good stories for you out of the newspaper. And our first story, I think this is a story that will run and run. We try to pick thematic issues. This story from the Eye about Prince Harry. Harry could return, the article says, if he learns to toe the royal line. Yeah, here's the article. If Prince Harry was reading the leaves of the cup of tea he was offered at his meeting, the article says, with the king on Wednesday afternoon, they hadn't met for quite a while, and I don't believe he was seeing Prince William when he was over here, then he might well have told him, you've got your chance, Harry, now don't blow it. This was less a meeting of minds and more a rendezvous of rules, an opportunity for the king and his advisors to enforce upon Harry that it is not so much as a word leaked from him or future meetings, then any bridges will be bombed. Bill, what do you reckon? Is there a way back for Harry or not? What do you think?
I have to admit, I'm probably not a great person to speak to about the royal family because, frankly, and it's probably going to be very unpopular saying this, I don't like the idea of a royal family, and I'm not a monarchist. I loved, admired, and respected the Queen.
Yeah,
not because of her blood and ancestry, but because of who she was and what she'd done. But to think, just think about this, Tim. This family are in a position of authority, heads of state, etc., on the public purse simply because of who they're born to.
Yes.
And then you get this guy who doesn't want to do it, all the so-called work they're supposed to do. He doesn't want to do it, but he's resentful about it, and he's throwing little bombs of complaint into the royal family and causing all sorts of trouble. All of it so he can clear off with his actress wife and go over to make things on Netflix, which obviously aren't working for him. That's why he's trying to come back. Frankly, they should have nothing to do with him. And if it was anything to me, I'd cut 95% of the royal family out anyway, and I'd be having a serious conversation about do we in the 21st century want to do this. have people who were born to be heads of state. I resent it deeply, to be honest with you, Tim. I don't bow to anyone for their birthright, and I don't think that the British people in the 21st century should have to do that.
I am a monarchist, but I that partly is the opinion of that was partly formed, as you quite rightly point out, when the Queen, and there's only one Queen to me, they keep referring to Camilla as the Queen. I thought she was going to be the King's consort. There's only one Queen to me, and that was Elizabeth. I don't mean any disrespect to Camilla when I say that. She was a wonderful example, lived a life of selfless sacrifice and service to the country. I think one of the advantages of a monarchy, I think, is it gives you a head of state who is above party politics. And I think power is taken away and denied to others. But Bill, I'd just be interested, what would you replace it with? I mean, genuine question. What would you replace it with?
Well, first of all, let me row you back a bit, Tim. Have we got a monarch and a head of state who's above politics? With King Charles's absolutely obvious obsessions with green issues, which are followed by Prince William and other members.
Yeah, well, I know where you're coming from with that one, Bill. I mean, Queen Elizabeth certainly was.
Yeah, absolutely. I will never ever say a word against that lady. She was unbelievable. What would I replace it with? Well, and I know the arguments are going to come against it, but I believe in democracy, and I believe in elections, and I would want an elected head of state. And if you look at it, people say, yeah, but you might have ended up with Tony Blair. You might end up with Nigel Farage, who we both know. Now, the idea of Nigel being an elected head of state might appeal to you. Having spent quite a lot of time with him, it would terrify me. But the point is, it would be the will of the people. If we could have a monarch like the Queen, who was politically neutral, my arguments would be wither on the vine. And even though I resented even then the idea of a family ruling over us, I had to just knuckle down because she was so excellent at the job. There's never going to be anyone like her. They're always going to have some kind of blatant political bias. And if they are, they should be elected.
Yes, I thought when she died, Bill, we will not see her like again. Sadly. So in terms of, Harry could return, it sounds like probably not a subject that's keeping you up at night, Bill.
only in as much as I hope it doesn't cost the taxpayer any more money. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think when I remember their wedding. I mean, it was quite a do. It was a lovely summer's day, big crowds. It drew a huge TV audience, one of the biggest TV audiences of the year. It was an international event. It was covered in goodness knows how many countries. And I thought, okay, interesting. Mixed race wife, not from the UK. Could this be good for the Commonwealth? They did a couple of Commonwealth tours. They did one to Australia and one to South Africa, and those tours are not a holiday. But then I don't know. The wheels seem to fall off, Bill, and I think to what extent were they both prepared to knuckle down? And this is what the article says. If he learns to toe the line, to what extent were they prepared to knuckle down and sort of, sing for their supper and have to do the boring round of royal duties? Opening the cement factory at goodness knows where, meeting people that will remember you, but you'll never see them again.
I think there's a use for them in that kind of thing. And there's a use for rules when we have weddings and things like that. And everyone likes the Disneyland approach. I've got an idea I'd float out there. I've thought this for years. We should take 50% of the royal family, make it Royal Family PLC and privatise it and make them employees of Royal Family PLC. Sell the shares. We'd make billions off it. We could afford to get rid of some debt.
I'd probably buy a few.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it'll never fall into foreign or complete ownership by someone else, because we'll only sell 49% of the shares and the government holds the other 51%. Make a fortune out of it. Tell them they're employees of UK's Disneyland with their palaces and their fancy frocks and clothes, and they've got to go out there and earn a living. Otherwise, we'll sack them. I could keep a monarchy then.
Okay, and you could put them on a sort of performance-related bonus and all this sort of stuff.
Princess Anne would be the highest earner.
Well, she would. She is the unsung hero of the royal family.
Absolutely.
She does over 500 public engagements a year. I mean, that, when you bear in mind weekends and traveling, and she does need a whole, she doesn't need some time. I mean, to do 500 royal engagements a year. What is she, 70? Was she 72 or something?
She's getting on, but she never whines or whinges. Or
no, just gets on. Never complain, never explain.
Exactly. We don't think what a hard life. Oh, how terrible for her. She just cracks on and does it. She
is the unsung hero of the royal family. Okay, Bill, thanks for your comments on that. Interesting that we have convergent views on the royals. So let's move on to the next story.
Unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented TV.
Okay, so we're back with Bill Etheridge, and let's move on to the next story, which is from the Mail. And as I said, it's been a momentous week with all sorts of stuff going on, and particularly with Lord Mandelson. So we've now got this story from the Mail, a very interesting article written by the journalist Dan Hodges, and entitled, as we can see here, "In Westminster, there's an end of days mood around Starmer, like there was with Boris and Liz Truss." And then the article starts. So what changed? 24 hours ago, Starmer stood at the House of Commons dispatch box and sternly insisted the ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with Epstein, and he is right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he is playing an important role in the UK-US relationship. Well, Bill, firstly, we're into phase 2 of Labour. How's it going?
It's catastrophic, and it's probably even worse than people like me feared it would be. And I was expecting a disaster. They've lost control of everything. They've not only lost control of the economy and finances, which, let's be honest, Tim, you and I are probably a similar kind of age. We would probably have guessed that would happen from what happened in our earlier childhood years.
Yes.
But it's not just that. They've lost control of every narrative. They've lost control of sleaze within their government. They've had Mandelson in this position. Now, if anyone in the world was likely to be a bit of a dodgy character and a bad egg that's going to cause you trouble, it's Mandelson. And when the time comes for Mandelson to fall, he tends to have a habit of knowing where their bodies are buried and making other people fall with him. He's done it over and over again. It was ludicrous to a point, this guy. And it just shows, again, when we've got another senior political figure enmeshed in this Epstein stuff and sleazy, dirty, nasty, low-down behaviour, and it's just awful, the same thing all the time. They are enmeshed in all the things and worse that they criticise the Tories for. They're worse than that after 1 year in power. They've lost the economy, they've lost finances, they've lost the narrative, and frankly, they're going to go before the full term. There's no way that this will continue because we're slip-sliding really quickly into complete disaster.
Yeah, very interesting comments, Bill. Thank you. Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, let's give them a little bit of a break. I mean, they did have a bad inheritance from 14 years of the useless Tories. And I actually, no government has had, a bit like in 2010, to be fair, when Labour handed over in 2010, no government has had a good inheritance when no new incoming government has had a good inheritance or even a half decent inheritance on the economy and the public finances since John Major made way for Tony Blair back in 1997.
That's true, Tim. But I would argue that the reason the finances are in a mess were the measures taken during the COVID period, which, if Labour had been in charge, would have been even greater or even worse. So, frankly, for them to claim, oh, well, we were given this bad situation, the Tories only did probably half as much as Labour would have done. And it was all squandered, wasted money, but Labour would have been much worse at it. So I don't think they've got a leg to stand on.
Fair comment, I think. Yes, you could complain, yeah, the Conservatives handed over a Britain that was overspent, overborrowed, overtaxed. But Bill, you're right, it would have been even worse if we'd had Labour in. And they wanted even more harsh and punitive lockdowns, didn't they?
Yeah, and lockdowns and the cost of everything to do with that period of time dwarfs everything else that happened during that 14 years in terms of the amount of money that was squandered, thrown away, wasted, the amount of disastrous effect on our country and on our whole way of life. Lockdown trumps everything as if nothing else counts. That's how big a difference it was. And Labour and the Lib Dems and all the other opposition parties would have gone further. So they can't say anything about it.
And the trade unions wanted harsher lockdowns. Labour they seem to be listening more to the unions than to business, Bill. And I think that's, for me, that's a big worry. I think lockdowns, the cost to the economy, the loss to the public finances, the direct cost of furloughing millions of people, and then the on top of that, we had to have a fuel bills bailout that cost another fortune. And at one stage, the BBC were even asking government ministers, would you be able to, when it looked like interest rates were going up, well, they were, will you be able to pay people's mortgages for them? And this whole impression has been created that the government has a bottomless pit of money and that they can bail out everybody. Well, of course, some would say, well, they bailed out the banks, didn't they? And that's probably a fair comment. But and this impression has been created that the government has an endless checkbook and can just spend all the money at once. And it was true back in the day. Go back 10 years, the government could borrow at very, very low cost. Well, not anymore, Bill. So, for the first time in a long time, I'm seriously worried about the future of our whole country, not just the economy and the public finances.
We're in crisis, Tim. This is something unprecedented since the 70s, and we're in a structural state of overspending. How are we going to stop this happening? People have got so used to the overspending, to the massive waste, to the feather bedding of everyone's lives, that if someone came in and did a Mrs. Thatcher and said, look, we're going to run this like a housewife and look at the incomings and outgoings, the amount of cuts that would be required would be so vast, so huge, you'd get thousands of trade unionists, students, every other fellow traveller you want out on the streets complaining and protesting about it. So instead of that, we've got governments who don't grip the problem and allow us to continue on this decline, which has hastened since this incompetent government's come in, hastened this decline to the point where we have to be bailed out, and outside forces will force us to do the things that we should have been doing for years. Cuts. We need to cut, and we've got to get less regulation, try and find a way of more competitive taxation at the same time as cutting the vast state sector. We cannot carry on like this. It is not possible.
No, you're quite right, Bill. And it was clear towards the end of the Conservatives' last term in government that the country was overspent. And really, I think one of Liz Truss's mistakes was that she didn't announce any savings in spending. And it was, and a bit like Gordon Brown coming up to the 2010 election, Rishi Sunak really should have been trimming spending. But of course, there's an election coming. You don't want to do that. So I think cuts will have to be made. I think you're quite right, Bill. Cuts will have to be made or they will be forced on us, I think. Okay, so thank you for that. And let's have a look at some of the other programs here on Unprecedented TV. And don't forget, Okay, thanks for that. And we're back with Bill Etheridge. Okay, our next story, Bill, following on from that, but in a more specific way. That last story was from the Mail, and this one is from the Mirror. We tried to get a spread of newspapers. So this story is from the Mirror, and its headlines Tax and End, which is obviously a play on words, tax and spend. Business chiefs warn 100,000 high street jobs at threat under Labour plans for a rates shake-up. Up to 100,000 high street jobs are at risk if Labour goes ahead with a tax shake-up. Industry bosses have warned. The British Retail Consortium says the jobs could be lost across 400 of Britain's biggest shops and high streets if a proposed overhaul of business rates takes place, putting larger stores into a higher rates tax band. This, of course, comes on top of the increase in employers' national contribution, particularly at the lower level, and at the rises in the minimum wage. Bill, what's your high street looking like?
Probably very much similar to everyone else's. Lots of closed down shops, lots of Turkish barbers, and lots of charity shops. I think we were seeing that everywhere. But this is symptomatic. I mean, there is no symbol of the panic and the lack of ideas from this government more risible than Rachel Reeves. She came into office telling us about some made-up £20 billion black hole. She's since then increased spending by hundreds of billions. And it reminds me of being back in the European Parliament, actually, because they used to say, well, we need to spend this, we haven't got the budget, so we're going to have to ask the member states for more. And she's saying, well, I haven't got the money, I'm going to have to ask for more in tax. She'll do anything to get her hands on money, whether it be raids on the inheritance tax, the high street, national insurance, you name it, because she cannot stop spending. And she's out of control. And if Starmer was any kind of prime minister, he'd be reining her in. But he's got no control over either. She does not have a clue of what she's doing. All she sees is the desperate hole that she's in. And how does she get out of it? By digging deeper.
Yes, well, they keep talking about the black hole, don't they? Well, when you're in a black hole, stop digging.
Yeah.
That would help. And this is one of the things that worries me about this Labour government the most, Bill, is where's the business experience? I mean, look at their front bench. Look who's in their cabinet. It's all lawyers, trade union reps, and career politicians. There's barely anybody in there who has worked in business or been self-employed, let alone started and run a business, where at the end of the month, you're sort of worrying, after you've paid all the staff, whether there's going to be any money left for you. Or if you're self-employed, you're not getting a regular salary every month. So this really worries me. Do they know how an economy works, Bill, how jobs are created and you can grow an economy and that generates more jobs and more tax revenue? Do you think they know?
Well, I understand this argument about saying there's no business people on the front bench, and I subscribe to it. I mean, before and after politics, I've been involved in business to various degrees, and you need to understand it. But let's be honest, Tim, it's not like that they're in a vacuum. They can ask someone.
Yes.
They've got chambers of commerce and other trade organisations who are desperately trying to talk to them all the time. So one would assume that to get to the top of any organisation, you've got to be relatively intelligent. So you must understand that if you don't know something, you ask someone. It's not rocket science. So I don't believe it's a case that they don't know what business needs. I believe it's a case that they know what business needs and they've decided to throw that away because they couldn't care less. That's how I see it, because private business and private enterprise is against their whole ethos and their whole political beliefs. They'd much rather have a state sector of 99% somehow self-funding itself. That's what they're about. Private business to them is nothing but a burden and a pain and an anathema to their whole thought process.
So you think there's a sort of an ideological kind of a blockage there that, they don't want to do what business needs. They see business as a bit dodgy, perhaps even evil, making a profit and exploiting the masses, all this sort of stuff. And we see this with this employment rights bill. You're going to have the right to sue for unfair dismissal from day one, and many of their changes have really hit these sectors hard. This particular article talks about the retail sector and the high streets. No wonder we have so many people out of work when we're bringing in millions from abroad. Many young people, their first jobs are in retail or in hospitality. Retail here is in working on the high street. And those sectors have been absolutely hammered by what's been going ahead. Okay, well, let's take a break now and let's look at some of the other great shows here on Unprecedented TV. And don't forget, folks, to like and subscribe. Thank you.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
Boring. 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 Boring.
You got his work. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what we're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for the immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Okay, so we're back with Bill Etheridge here on Tim Scott Uncancelled. Okay, 2 more stories left and then we'll close the show, but there are a couple of good ones. Okay, so this story I think is a little bit more of a serious one. Hospices. This is from The Guardian. Hospices on financial brink as 40% plan to make cuts. And the story says hospices are on the brink. And 2 in 5, so 40%, are planning to make cuts this year. Despite the importance of end-of-life care, if assisted dying becomes legal, the sector has warned before the first House of Lords debate on the legislation. Hospices UK, which represents the sector, said many were financially struggling and still in the dark about how to get funding for end-of-life care, how it will be improved, and when assisted dying legislation comes into effect. Bill, have you got any knowledge or any sort of hospices up your way? There's quite a few around here. I think they do a great work.
Yeah, there are a couple near to me, and of course they do great work. And this is the kind of area where politicians need to understand what really is important to the people. This kind of thing where hospices are in trouble, partly because of the environment we're in and partly because of a new bill coming through. And they've not thought about how these hospices can deal with the situation. It's very saddening, and especially for those of us who have members of our families who are potentially going to be needing the use of hospices in the near future. To think that in a country where so many hundreds of billions of pounds are frittered away, thrown away, splashed around, and organisations doing this kind of excellent work are even having to think about money is frankly offensive. I think it's shameful.
Yeah, we've never quite managed to square this circle, have we? With trying to marry up the NHS with social care, and you get people stuck in hospital and taking up a hospital bed because there's nowhere to discharge them from because they can't get the right kind of care. It really is a wonderful sector. It mentions assisted dying here, Bill. I just appreciate your view on that.
It's a very difficult one for me. I am of a libertarian leaning, and I tend to think that if people no longer want to be here, then there should be some way to facilitate that. However, I don't like the idea of anything to do with the state being involved in whether people live or die. And it's you know what, Jim. Not enough people in politics say this, and I'm going to say it. Now, I say the same thing when it comes to questions about abortion as well. I don't know the answer. I don't know enough to pontificate on a subject like this because I, as a man, am torn. I see both sides of the argument, and I just cannot decide which side to come down on. Now, you won't hear that from me very often. You've probably never heard that from me very before. But I don't.
Drop the news.
Yeah, but I just don't believe. I think sometimes, in politics, when there's an issue like this, there's got so many implications, both theological, political, every which way there is. Sometimes you should just say, "Look, guys, I'm as torn as the rest of you." And we need to look at this and discuss it more. I'm a little uncomfortable with a Labour government putting through an assisted dying bill because it's going to have more state control than I would like. I just, instinctively think that. But I feel torn on it, Tim. I'll be straightforward with you. This is one area where you will find me on the fence and agonising over the answers because I just don't know which way to go on it.
Yeah, my big concern about it, Bill, is, of course, if somebody's in a really, really horrible, horrendous situation, you can understand why they or their relatives might want to take this route. But my worry is, give it a few years and we will have people being, shall we say, encouraged to go into this direction. I'm interested to hear you say about, opinions. People like you and I, Bill, are rarely short of an opinion. And there's one area where I've sort of kept out of it, and that's the whole, let's not get into it now, but this whole vaccine thing, it's such a complex area, unless I have a couple of days to sit down and do some study on it, I'm probably a little bit like you on this assisted.
Well, on that one, I'd say I'm pro-vaccine, anti-jab. Yeah. I think that's an easy way to define it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I wouldn't. I've recently had the shingles jab, just for the record. Because I saw my mother-in-law in her 70s. She got shingles, and it was absolutely devastating because it's not just physical; it's also neurological, and it really hastened her decline. So anyway, last story of the day, and finally, as they say, last story of the day. And it's a cartoon from the Times. And here we have the royal dinner coming up with Trump's state visit. And the flunky there is saying to the king, "Who do we invite in place of Lord Mandelson?" And Ed Davey has already announced, opportunistic Ed, I call him, anything for a bit of publicity, throwing himself off a waterboard or doing a bit of abseiling, or what was it, jumping over fences on a wooden horse. He's already said that he will boycott the dinner. But guess who is tapping the king on the back for a seat at the top table, Bill?
Well, Prince Andrew there lurking away. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. We discussed Mandelson and Epstein earlier. Epstein must have been very, very well connected, because in his disastrous interview with Emily Maitlis, when she said to him, "Do you regret your association with Epstein?" He should, of course, have said, "Yes, dreadful man, wish I'd never met him," which is kind of the line that Lord Mandelson tried to take, but it didn't work out for him in the end. Of course, he fell straight into that trap and said, "Well, yes, of course, he introduced me to many wonderful people and people that were very useful." And so, Epstein seemed to be at the whole nexus of many, many people. But we were talking earlier, Bill, about was there a way back for Prince Harry? I think we can say with some confidence that the route for Prince Andrew back into public life, I think, is pretty firmly closed off.
Well, I think if Prince Andrew finds his way back to the top of the monarchy or there or thereabouts, us Republicans like me might well have our day. I don't think there's any chance whatsoever of that, and quite rightly not.
Even a monarchist like me, Bill, I think would have to agree with you there. Okay, well, look, Bill, great to have you on. Great to see you again. Great to have you back on the show. Folks, thank you so much for watching. It's been another episode of Tim Scott Uncancelled with me, Tim Scott. Please follow Unprecedented TV on YouTube to like and subscribe. So that's this week's episode, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Tim Scott Uncancelled.